let me try to share a few thoughts based on the experiences that we've had in Tata's and my own experiences. I think the business world is at an inflection point. In the old days, at the time of the Industrial Revolution, the business world, the basis of competitive advantage in the business world was on industrial assets, physical assets. In the last 20 years, we've heard a lot about the basis of competitiveness being based on information assets, knowledge assets. And I wonder sometimes, as we go forward into whatever the next age will be called in the next 50 years, whether the world of business and the basis of competitiveness in the world of business will be based on moral assets. I realize that this sounds rather pompous, but I can't help feeling that there are many evidences around us in the society right now today which do cause us to ask such a question. After all, commerce and business has been predicated on the principles of capitalism. And it doesn't matter where in the world you go, capitalism is associated with greed, avarice, ego, and all these sorts of negative adjectives. Excesses happen periodically through history of commerce, ever since the joint stock company was invented in 1856 as a device. And these excesses are rampant all around us today. So at least on Gandhi Jayanti, it is not a bad idea for us to reflect on what may be the role of moral assets. And there are two factors I think we can't run away from. And these are two facts which I should like to start by pointing out. First, that the joint stock corporation as we understand it today, which as I said earlier is an invention of the 1800s, is here to stay as a major agent of change in social and economic development in all sorts of societies and countries around the world. And the second thing that we must remember is that there are more and more individuals in society who are driven by a set of personal values, what they stand for and what it is that they would like to do. And they're ensconced in a corporate environment or a corporate culture which may be at variance with their personal values. And they're struggling to reconcile these two. In other words, there's a mutuality, an increasing nexus between personal values of an individual and the corporate values of the entity through which he earns his living. These are two factors we cannot run away from. Both are true. I want to narrate two episodes, two stories, to illustrate this point. And I am going to choose a completely different area, mountaineering, completely away from corporations to illustrate my point. In 1982, there was a senior executive in Morgan Stanley in New York. His name was Bowen McCoy. And he undertook a 6-month sabbatical, which is company sponsored. And part of that sabbatical of creating self-awareness, knowing yourself better, etc., was a mountaineering expedition in the Himalayas. He went along with another colleague of his, and they were just a bit short of their last assault, the target that they wanted to reach. Around them, following was a New Zealand group of mountaineers, and behind them a Japanese group. They had reached a very important point from which the final assault would begin. As Bowen McCoy and his colleagues set out on this last assault, they heard a groan from the ice and the snow around them. And they found the body of a sadhu who was naked, not at all equipped for the minus 38 degrees centigrade and the altitude of 18,000 feet. A major dilemma arose because the sadhu was clearly dying. Should we abandon the expedition and go back to rescue the sadhu? Or should we carry the sadhu with us as part of the expedition? Or should some of us take the sadhu back and some of us go ahead with the expedition? This was a very good example where individual values, which were undoubtedly good religious, spiritual values to help another fellow being, would have dictated that you do put on highest priority the act of saving the sadhu. And your group values or your corporate culture in which you're ensconced, which is competitiveness and trying to reach the mountain peak, would say, well, the sadhu might live or die, we must go ahead and achieve our goal. In the event, they left the sadhu and they went ahead, and it is never clear whether the sadhu lived or died. But Bhavan McCoy has written a case, which the Harvard Business School has published, about the ethical dilemma that is posed to him and his colleague. And has brought out the fact that until his dying day, this issue of whether the sadhu lived or died would continue to plague him and haunt him. And that's because he was not able to reconcile his individual value system with the organizational value system into which he found himself placed. Had the mountaineers reached a consensus on what is to be done, his conscience might have rested lighter, but as it happens, they did not do so. Incidentally, after 1982, when this happened, as late as last year, there was another episode. There was a mountain climbing episode for people who were handicapped, and there was a double amputee, a New Zealander, and his name was Mark Inglis. And he managed to climb Mount Everest, which is quite a remarkable record for a double amputee to be able to climb Mount Everest. However, as it so happened, 26 years after the last episode of Bhavan McCoy, Mark Inglis, on his way up, found that there was one of his colleagues, there were 40 of them in that group, a chap called David Sharp, who was dying. And Mark Inglis had to choose between helping David Sharp or going ahead and climbing the mountain. He chose to climb the mountain. And it became a subject of great controversy on the subject of ethics and human values, whether he did the right thing or not. So despite a great achievement, having climbed Everest as a double amputee, the act of his climbing became controversial on the grounds of ethics. I mention these two stories because they bring out in a non-corporate context, in a non-company context, the kind of conflicts we face every day in dealing with our individual value system and the organizational value system or the environment social value system into which we are placed and we operate. This happens in our companies all the time. My instinct tells me one thing, my company's culture tells me another. And therefore getting more harmony between the corporate value systems, which I influence through my behavior, and my value system, which the corporation influences through its behavior, is an essential part of understanding what is the true nature of business. Business is not something which is merely commerce, it is something which has got a very humane aspect to it. And the events of what's happening around the world today do suggest that we tend to forget this. So far as Tatas are concerned, we've had several experiences, and I could really speak for hours on this. But in the interest of time and brevity, I'll use the next 10 minutes to touch upon just a few aspects, hoping that the panelists who are following will be able to far more vividly expand and embellish their views, which may be different from mine, on this whole subject. Again, I like to narrate anecdotes rather than become philosophical about it. In the late 1800s, all of us will remember that Swami Vivekananda went to Chicago to attend the Parliament of Religions. And he became a very, very ardent and outspoken advocate of human values. One of the people he met was John D. Rockefeller, who had made a great fortune in the booming oil and gas business at that time. And John D. Rockefeller was introduced to Swami Vivekananda in Chicago by a French lady, a French disciple of Swamiji, who has written this in her diary, and my source is therefore from the diary of the French lady. John D. Rockefeller came for a lark. I mean, he wasn't really interested in meeting Swamiji, but he was told of a saffron-robed person who was electrifying the people of Chicago, and so he went for curiosity. Swamiji didn't even look up from his desk. He continued to do his work. And after a while, when he looked up, John D. Rockefeller, who was not really used to being treated as just a common person, took his seat and a conversation ensued. And it became apparent to Swamiji that John D. Rockefeller had lots of wealth. And Swamiji posed him a question, and he said, if you had that much more money than other people, do you think you're that much smarter than all the other people? To which, of course, John D. Rockefeller said, of course. If he wasn't 100 times smarter, he would have 100 times the money. And Swamiji left him with an idea which said that if you come, you may not be 100 times smarter, you may be 3 times smarter, but if you've got 100 times the money, then perhaps you are merely an instrument through which this money has to go back to somebody else. Why don't you think about it? And why don't you think about leaving some of your money for other people? This sounded absolutely ridiculous to John D. Rockefeller. And he departed with a polite statement that he had worked really hard to make his money and he had absolutely no intention of leaving it to other people. Well, curiously, 3 weeks later, he came back to see Swami Vivekananda, this time of his own accord. And he threw on this table a piece of paper which said that he had endowed a certain sum of money, I forget how much it was, $100,000 or $500,000, for some noble purpose. And then he asked the question to Swami Vivekananda, are you happy now that I've done this? To which Swamiji looked up and said, why should I be happy? You ought to ask yourself the question whether you left enough out of the total wealth that you have. And it took another 15 years after 1898 when this episode happened. In 1913, John D. Rockefeller for the first time set up the Rockefeller Foundation, which has of course done enormous amount of good work in society consistently for the last several decades. I think it illustrates the point about trusteeship. When you earned a lot of money, whose money is it? Did that money come to you entirely because of yourself? Or is it possible that you're merely an instrument through which some other destiny or God or whatever you want to call it is channelizing this back to society? It is a very interesting question to ponder. I mentioned the story of John D. Rockefeller because the element of trusteeship comes out very clearly in the conversation between Swami Vivekananda and John D. Rockefeller. But I was also curious when I joined Tata's 10 years ago to reflect on the fact that probably the world's first charitable trust was set up by Jamsetji Tata in 1892. A long time, as many as 21 years before the Rockefeller Trust, and many years before the Andrew Carnegie Trust, the Ford Foundation, the Lord Leverhulme Trust, all of which came in the 1900s. And I asked myself the question, what made Jamsetji Tata, who was a wealthy man by the standards of his times, in the 1880s, he was a very, very wealthy man. But by international standards, probably not so wealthy. What made him think of setting up an instrument which was not known and well practiced in the corporate world at that time, to set up the J.N. Tata Endowment Trust, which, as he has articulated, would enable talented Indians to go out and get advanced training, and so that they could come back to India and work for the betterment of their country. Because he was firmly of the belief that you need good people to become better, better people to become the best if you want to advance society. What gave him that concern for society? What made him feel that the J.N. Tata Endowment Trust would make a difference? As it so happens, between 1892 and today, the J.N. Tata Endowment Trust has sent over 3,000 Indians who have gone out, studied, acquired qualifications and come back. And they include 2 chairmen of Atomic Energy Commissions, a Director General of the Scientific Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, a President of India, and many other very illustrious people who have indeed proven that if you take the good people and allow them to become the better of the best, they can play a very significant role in the national economic development of their countries. I think that's another example which illustrates how business can be the servant of society. Ulterior motive of making the profit is not to make profit or to declare a dividend or to declare bonus shares, but because in some way, as J.R.D. Tata said, what came from the people must go back to the people. Who does the company earn its profits from? From consumers. It earns it by buying from vendors, from using transport contractors, and it earns its revenue by selling it back to people like you and I. Oil to keep our hair groomed well, cars to transport us well, electric switches to switch on the bulbs in our houses. We are the people, the consumers, who give the money back to the company. And as a result of its efficiency, it is retaining a certain amount of profit. Who does that profit belong to? Not just to the shareholders. It has come out to the whole community, the whole society. And J.R.D. Tata had in a very forward-looking way stated that what comes from the people of India must go back to the people of India. And in this globalized world, I suppose we could say what comes from the 6.5 billion consumers of the world must in some way go back to 6.5 billion consumers of the world. And therefore, I would like to advocate that the fundamental characteristic of a person who's working with the trusteeship concept is to accept that this is the real purpose of business, to return to society what you earn from society. And if you're going to return it to society, you must work with what Lord Leverhulme said. Lord Leverhulme was the founder of what is today called Unilever, and was the founder of the Sunlight soap, which we are very familiar with. And what he said is that the task of a leader is to behave with the humility of the guy who paves the roads. Because the man who paves the roads is working with his toil and sweat to pave those roads, never once knowing that for decades and decades after he has finished paving his roads, millions of people will travel on those roads with hope in their heart and ambition in their eyes, trying to seek out a fortune for themselves in whatever they are doing. But never once will they ever think of who it was who paved the road for them. That's the way it is. Being an anonymous servant of humanity is very much a part of a leader's privilege, not his plight. And when that comes to people, then I think the concept of trusteeship leaps out at you in a way which makes leadership look effulgent, which makes leadership look meaningful. All of us have to lay our heads on the pillow for the last time, sometime in our lives. And it's what you left behind for other people that makes a big difference, and not your name. The names of many, many people are littered. I was very struck in Tata's when I first joined about 10 years ago. I used to visit various Tata units in remote locations, a fertilizer factory in UP, a hydroelectric plant in the Western Ghats. Almost always, the presentations began in the way presentations had been made to me during my career in Hindustan Lever about what are the challenges that the management faces and how they're overcoming it. The net message is we are right on top of our job, we are in safe hands. But they always ended in a way which was very unique. They almost always ended in a way with what are we doing with the community around us. It really didn't matter whether there were 6 people in a hydroelectric power station, or 60 managers in a large fertilizer factory, or 600 managers in a large steel factory. There was always a standard ending, that this is what we are doing with the community around us. And I was very struck. To be honest, I was a bit cynical. You know, when you join at my age, in your early 50s, you tend to become a bit cynical whether this is a PR put on. But honestly, I have been around to so many Tata units now, it cannot be a PR put on. I have never come across a circular from anybody in Bombay House which tells managers that they must engage with society, or that their presentation must end that way. People just do it because they are genuinely of the view that they have their job, that they earn their profit only because of the community, and it's to them that they must return. And I think it's a wonderful commentary on trusteeship when people can actually act out and behave them rather than make presentations to other people. When people can actually believe in it because it is their belief. They don't have to make an effort to believe in it. It is not a programmed thing that they have to do to practice trusteeship. It is the very reason why they are there. And that, I think, would be the nirvana of when business would have earned for itself a respectful place in society, which business can hold its head high to. The second aspect I would like to touch, and then I shall close, would be about the role of the CEO. One of the great mysteries of capitalism is that it has made the CEO the hero of the company. Magazines put his picture on the cover story, and we treat him like a hero, or in some unfortunate cases, a zero. And for some people, of course, they are heroes one day and zeros the other day. But you have to ask yourself the question, does a CEO really do all this by himself? Is it not human that when you see your picture, you see your names flashed all over, you start to believe in the mythology that you are the cause of the company's success? It's human nature. We are all gods of clay, and we fall into that trap. I'm reminded of a lovely story which is from the Bhagavad Purana. And in the Bhagavad Purana, just to refresh your memory, you might remember that the Yadav clan to which Krishna belonged had been cursed that they will die by self-destruction. And after the great war of the Mahabharata at Kurukshetra, the Yadavs, under the leadership of Lord Krishna, went to Dwarka, which is not far from where Tata Chemicals runs its factory at Mithapur. And in Dwarka, they started slaughtering each other as the curse took its effect. And therefore Lord Krishna sent an SMS, in a manner of speaking, to Indraprastha, to Yudhishthira, saying, I want that valiant archer, Arjuna, to come, because only Arjuna can save the situation, otherwise the Yadavas will kill each other. So Arjuna came in his chariot all the way to Dwarka from Indraprastha, and he found it was bedlam. So he decided that the only way to save the situation was to rescue the Yadav women. Because if you can rescue some women, then the clan can continue. If all the women are gone, of course, the clan wouldn't be there. So in his convoy, he assembled as many Yadav women as he could, and he rode out triumphantly out of Dwarka on his way back to Indraprastha, happy that he had saved the Yadav women and therefore the clan. The Yadavs, of course, destroyed themselves in the Dwarka. And as he went through the countryside, near what we might call Akola, Amravati area today, the Dasyus, the natives, set upon the convoy. And the very valiant Arjuna, in trying to save the women, took out his bow and arrow. And for some reason it didn't work this time. This great hero of many wars, Arjuna, the indefatigable Arjuna, could not overcome the Dasyus who had attacked him. And Tulsidas wrote in his book the following lines, which are very, very evocative about the CEO not being the hero. He said, Tulsi narse kya bada, samay bada balwan. Karavan luti gopika, wahi Arjun, wahi Baan. And for those not well versed with that rather quaint language, he says, what can Tulsi say about the greatness of man? Time is a great healer. When the caravan was being looted of the women, the same Arjun with the same Baan could not overcome them. And this is what happens to CEOs around the world. People who are great heroes today are zeros tomorrow. And therefore we need, in keeping with the concept of trusteeship as to what is the purpose of the corporation, that is to give back to society what it earned from society. The second attribute is that the ego-fanning mythology in which we are living, where the CEO is the hero of the day, must realize that he is the ultimate servant of society. And it is not he who does it, but the sweats and the labors of the many hundreds or thousands in his company, which is causing that company to do what it is doing. It is difficult for a modern day CEO with the media scene that we have to avoid the media, because part of his job is to communicate with them. But it takes a superhero to actually downplay his own role and promote the idea of trusteeship, in which he happens to be the trustee of the efforts of all the people who work for him and help the company to do so well. And one of the things in the Tata experience that has struck me a lot is the shareholding pattern that we have in Tatas, which in a sense allows us to do this. It's probably very unique in the world that the Tata companies are held by a company called Tata Sons, which is a private unlisted company. And the parent company therefore is unlisted, and the son and daughter companies are listed, like Tata Steel, Tata Consultancy, Tata Motors, Tata Chemicals, Tata Power, and so on. And so there are 3 million shareholders of the son companies and the grandson companies and the great-grandson companies. But you know who is the shareholder of the holding company Tata Sons? It is held over 2/3 by charitable trusts. And that's worth billions of dollars, comparable to the kinds of sums of money that Bill Gates is reported to have given to, or Warren Buffett has given to Bill Gates. And therefore I think the structure of Tatas embeds in the way Tatas operate certain values which you either practice or you go away and you can't practice. But it gives you a sense of humanity whereby you can run the company and yourself try to be a servant of society. And if that can be imbued or that can be translated across as many Tata companies as we have, it is rewarding. I get up and go to work every morning fighting to get every single extra rupee or dollar of profit to the extent that my influence or position allows me. And there are 350,000 other people doing this. But at the end of the day, we do this because that extra dollar, 2/3 of it will go to charity. So when we go find our way up to St. Peter, well, we will have at least something to say for ourselves, and that's a help. I wish all of business could adopt these kinds of models. Tatas are trying to spread this idea to other companies that we're acquiring around the world. And I can tell you one thing, it is electrifying and captivating to them. I have talked about this concept of trusteeship and the way Tatas practice it to the managers of our acquired companies in Detroit, in Washington, in the UK, and they just don't believe that it is possible. But gradually for them the penny drops that this is a very rare and unique kind of organization which is actually doing this. I would hope in the course of time it will increase people's commitment that at the end of the day business can be humane and need not be an inhuman lust for greed. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. I wish you all the best.